June 18, 1966. 30,000 feet above Binh Duong Province, South Vietnam. Captain Robert Duke Halloran adjusts his oxygen mask and scans the instrument panel of his B-52F Stratofortress. The bomber, call sign Iron Hand 23, is one of 6 aircraft in a tight formation so high above the Vietnamese jungle that the curvature of the earth is visible through the cockpit windows. At this altitude, the temperature outside hovers at minus 40 degrees. Inside, the constant hum of 8 Pratt & Whitney turbojets creates a steady vibration that Halloran has learned to ignore over 73 previous missions. IP in 3 minutes, announces Major Frank Morrison from the navigator's station below. Morrison's voice crackles through the intercom, professional and clipped. He's hunched over his radar scope in the belly of the aircraft, watching green phosphorescent blips that represent terrain features 6 miles below. Next to him, the radar navigator, Captain James Chen, cross-references coordinates with bombing tables. Their target, a suspected regimental headquarters of the People's Army of Vietnam, designated Target Box Alpha 79er. Halloran glances at his co-pilot, First Lieutenant David Marsh. The young officer's hands rest steady on the controls, but Halloran can see the slight tension in his jaw. This is Marsh's 14th mission, still new enough to feel the weight of what they're about to unleash. "Bomb doors coming open," Halloran announces. He flips 2 switches on the overhead panel. Hydraulics whine as the massive doors in the aircraft's belly begin to part. The sudden change in airflow causes a slight buffeting. Outside, nothing but endless blue sky and scattered cumulus clouds far below. 6 miles beneath them, Senior Colonel Nguyen Van Tin stands in a forest clearing, studying a hand-drawn map spread across a makeshift bamboo table. The map shows troop positions for his 9th Division, 3 regiments totaling over 7,000 men dispersed across a 10-kilometer corridor. Tin is 52 years old, a veteran of Dien Bien Phu, who carries shrapnel in his left leg from the siege that broke French colonial power. He wears the simple green pith helmet and khaki uniform of the NVA, distinguished only by his collar tabs. Around him, the jungle thrums with life. Cicadas drone their endless song. Somewhere in the canopy, a gibbon calls out. The air hangs thick and hot, saturated with moisture that makes every breath feel like swallowing warm soup. Tin's aide, Lieutenant Pham Duc Thang, points to positions on the map where supply caches have been established along infiltration routes heading south. "The American ground forces are concentrated here," Thang says, indicating a position 15 kilometers to the east. "Our scouts report they're preparing for a sweep operation. We should consider—" Tin holds up a hand. He tilts his head slightly, listening. But there's nothing unusual. Just the jungle sounds. Just the heat. Just the war that has consumed his adult life in an endless cycle of movement, concealment, and sudden violence. He doesn't know that at this precise moment Morrison is calling out, 30 seconds to release. He doesn't know that Chen has locked the bombing computer onto coordinates that intersect with his exact position. He doesn't know that 108,000 pounds of high-explosive iron bombs are suspended in 6 B-52 bomb bays, waiting. In the bomber, a red light on Halloran's panel turns green. "Bombs away," Morrison announces. The aircraft lurches upward slightly as the immense weight releases. Halloran feels it through his seat, that familiar lightness as 27 750-pound bombs and 24 500-pound bombs fall free into the air. Below, Tin returns his attention to the map. He's planning tonight's movement. His men are resting in concealed positions, in bunkers and hammocks strung between trees, and tunnels hand-carved into the red earth. They've survived American artillery. They've survived helicopter gunships. They've learned to hear the distant thump of Hueys and scatter before the rockets come. But they cannot hear what's coming now. The bombs fall in silence, tumbling through 6 miles of atmosphere. They're not rocket-propelled. They're not guided. They're simple iron casings filled with Composition B explosive, falling according to the ancient mathematics of gravity and trajectory. At terminal velocity, they descend at over 500 miles per hour. Tin looks up briefly at the sky. Clear. Beautiful. The blue vault of heaven unmarked by contrails this far south. He allows himself a moment to appreciate it before returning to the business of war. The first bomb strikes 700 meters east of his position. The explosion is not a sound. It's a physical force that precedes sound, a shock wave that travels through the earth faster than through air. Private Nguyen Van Tin feels it first as a vibration through the soles of his feet where he sits in a bunker carved 6 feet underground. He's 19 years old, writing a letter to his mother in Haiphong on a scrap of paper salvaged from an American ration box. The pencil in his hand begins to tremble. Then the sound arrives, a crack so loud it seems to split reality itself. The bunker's log roof showers dirt. Duke drops his letter and grabs his AK-47, but he doesn't understand what he's supposed to do with it. Above ground, his squad leader, Sergeant Nguyen Minh, is standing near a cooking fire when the first bomb detonates. The flash is white-hot, brighter than the sun. Minh throws himself flat on instinct, arms over his head. The second bomb hits 300 meters south, then the third, the fourth. They're coming in a pattern, marching across the jungle in a precise line, each explosion separated by a fraction of a second. But to the men on the ground, time has stopped meaning anything. There is only noise and pressure and terror. In his command post, Colonel Tin is thrown against the bamboo table. The map flutters away in the blast wind. Thang is shouting something, but Tin can't hear him. He can't hear anything except a high-pitched ringing that fills his skull. He tries to stand, but the earth is moving. Another explosion, closer. The trees around the clearing snap like matchsticks. A mahogany tree, 4 feet in diameter, topples with agonizing slowness, its root ball tearing free from soil that's been liquefied by the shock waves. At 30,000 feet, Halloran maintains his heading. The bombing computer has done its work. The aircraft is already several miles past the target box, climbing slightly as it burns fuel and gains altitude. Behind them, the other 5 B-52s in the formation are releasing their loads in synchronized sequence, each bomber adding another 108,000 pounds of ordnance to the target area. Good release, Morrison reports. BDA will have to confirm, but radar shows solid coverage. BDA, Bomb Damage Assessment. It's abstract language for what's happening below. What's happening below is apocalypse. The bombs continue to fall in their mathematical precision. Each B-52 drops its load across a box, approximately 1,000 meters long and 500 meters wide. With 6 aircraft, the devastated zone stretches nearly 3 kilometers, a rectangle of earth that's being systematically erased. The explosions create craters 15 feet deep and 30 feet across. Trees are shredded into splinters, bunkers collapse, foxholes become graves. Private Duke is screaming, though he can't hear his own voice. The log roof of his bunker is caved in on one side. Dirt fills his mouth. He claws at the earth above him, animal panic overriding everything his training taught him about staying in protected positions during bombardment. He has to get out. He has to see the sky. He tears at the logs with bleeding fingers. 300 meters west, Sergeant Minh has stopped trying to make sense of what's happening. He's curled into a ball in a depression that was once a bomb crater from an earlier strike, an old wound in the earth that's now his only shelter. Each explosion sends showers of dirt and shrapnel whistling overhead. A piece of metal. He'll never know if it was bomb casing or a tree branch turned into a projectile. Slices across his shoulder blade. He doesn't feel it. The adrenaline has pushed him beyond pain into a state of pure survival instinct. The bombing pattern walks toward Colonel Tin's position like the footsteps of an invisible giant. The NVA colonel has made it to a slit trench 20 meters from his command post. Thang is beside him, hands pressed over his ears, mouth open in a scream or prayer or both. Tin watches a bomb crater materialize 50 meters away. One moment there's jungle, the next there's a smoking pit with sides of churned earth and exposed roots hanging like broken veins. The blast wave hits him like a fist. His body is lifted and thrown backward. He lands hard, ribs cracking against something. A rock, a root, he doesn't know. There's blood in his mouth. His ears are bleeding. The world has been reduced to vibration and light and the terrible certainty that the next bomb has his name on it. But then, impossibly, it stops. The last bomb in the string detonates 400 meters east. The sound rolls away across the jungle, echoing from distant hills. Then there's silence. Or what passes for silence when your eardrums have been shattered by overpressure. The ringing remains, the world feels muffled underwater. Tin lies on his back, staring up at a sky that's now obscured by smoke and dust. His chest heaves. He's alive. The realization comes slowly, almost with disappointment. He's alive. which means he has to take command again, has to assess the damage, has to function. He rolls onto his side and vomits into the torn earth. High above, Iron Hand 2-3 banks, slightly to the south, beginning its long flight back to Anderson Air Force Base in Guam. Halloran logs the mission time. Morrison begins his post-strike report. In the tailgunner position, Staff Sergeant William Torres sees nothing below but smoke, thick, brown-gray columns rising from the jungle canopy like pillars holding up the sky. They've been in the target area for less than 2 minutes. 20 minutes pass before Colonel Tin can stand without his legs giving out. The jungle around him has been transformed into something alien. Where there was canopy, there are now shafts of sunlight penetrating through gaps torn in the green ceiling. Where there were trees, there are splintered trunks and branches twisted into sculptures of violence. The ground is pockmarked with craters, some still smoking, the earth inside them baked to glass by the heat of detonation. Thang is sitting against a tree, his face blank, his eyes tracking nothing. Tin grabs his shoulder and shakes him. The young lieutenant blinks slowly, focuses, and nods. He's functional. That's enough. "Find the radio," Tin says. His own voice sounds distant, coming from somewhere outside his body. "Find whoever's alive." The radio is buried under debris from the collapsed command post. It takes Tin and Thang 5 minutes of digging to unearth it. The handset is cracked, but the unit powers on. Tin begins calling his battalion commanders on the command frequency. Static. He tries again. More static. Then, finally, a voice. Weak, distorted, but human. "2nd Battalion, respond." "This is Tin. Report your status." The voice on the other end breaks up. "Cannot. Casualties everywhere." Sergeant Min emerges from his crater and begins to walk. He has no destination. His body simply moves because remaining still feels like death. Around him, other figures are rising from the churned earth like revenants. Some are walking. Some are crawling. Some are sitting motionless, staring at nothing. He finds the first body 15 meters from his position, Private Chow, a boy from his squad who joined the unit 3 months ago. Chow is on his back, eyes open, no visible wounds. Min checks for a pulse and finds nothing. The overpressure has killed him, rupturing organs inside an intact shell. Min closes the boy's eyes and continues walking. The numbers begin to accumulate in Tin's mind as reports trickle in over the next hour. 2nd Battalion, approximately 40% casualties. 3rd Battalion, unable to establish contact with 2 companies. 1st Battalion, command post destroyed, battalion commander missing. The 9th Division, which had numbered over 7,000 men at dawn, has been shattered. Not destroyed. Tin's military mind makes the distinction automatically, but rendered combat ineffective. The survivors are scattered, disorganized, many of them in shock. Private Duke pulls himself from his collapsed bunker, blinking in the smoke-filtered sunlight. His hands are bleeding. His uniform is caked with red dirt. He looks around for his squad and sees only craters and debris. Someone is calling for help, a voice weak and distant. He follows the sound to a partially collapsed bunker where he finds 3 men from another platoon. 2 are dead, the 3rd has both legs crushed under a fallen log. "Help me," the man whispers. "Please." Duke stares at him. The man's legs are twisted at impossible angles, bone visible through torn flesh. They're 15 kilometers from the nearest aid station, and Duke doesn't even know if the aid station still exists. He opens his mouth to say something. What, he doesn't know. But no words come out. By mid-afternoon, Colonel Tin has established a casualty collection point in a sector of jungle that escaped the heaviest bombing. The wounded are being carried in on improvised stretchers, ponchos stretched between bamboo poles. The dead are being laid in rows covered with whatever fabric can be found. Tin counts 47 bodies. But there are gaps in the rows, spaces for the missing who are still being searched for in the torn landscape. A captain from 3rd Battalion approaches, his left arm in a makeshift sling. "Comrade Colonel, we've found the supply cache in Sector 4. And destroyed everything, the medical supplies, the ammunition, the rice stores, all of it." Tin nods slowly. He's building a picture in his mind of what happened, though he still doesn't fully understand how it happened. There was no warning, No aircraft engine sounds, no forward air controller marking targets with smoke, just sudden, devastating violence from an empty sky. "Did anyone see the aircraft?" Tin asks. The captain shakes his head. "No one. Some men say they heard jet engines after the bombs fell, but—" He trails off, the implication clear. After the bombs fell. Not before, never before. Sergeant Min finds his squad leader, Lieutenant Nguyen Van Tin, organizing a search party. Tam's face is streaked with dirt and blood from a gash above his eyebrow. He's moving with purpose, barking orders, doing what officers do when there's nothing else to be done except impose order on chaos. "How many from our company?" Min asks. Tom doesn't look at him. "We're still counting." "Cao is dead. Nguyen is dead. I think Pham is too. I found his rifle, but not him." Add them to the list. The list. Min realizes that somewhere, someone is writing names on paper, creating a document that will travel up the chain of command to Hanoi, where old men in offices will read the numbers and plan the next operation. The thought should make him angry. But he feels nothing. The bombing has hollowed him out. As the sun begins to set, Tin convenes his surviving officers under a tarpaulin strung between trees. There are 12 of them, should be 23. The absent faces are conspicuous. Major Phan, the operations officer, Captain Truong, who commanded the reconnaissance company, Lieutenant Colonel Din, the executive officer. "We need to relocate," Tin says. His voice is hoarse from shouting orders all day. "The Americans may send follow-up strikes or ground forces to assess damage. We move after dark, disperse into company-sized elements, and regroup at the secondary assembly area." One of the captains, Tin doesn't remember his name, there are too many new faces, speaks up. "Comrade Colonel, how did they do this? How did they hit us without warning?" Tin looks at the young officer. The question has been gnawing at him since the first bomb fell. He thinks about the clear sky, the absence of sound, the mathematical precision of the destruction. And he realizes something that makes his blood cold. This wasn't tactical air support reacting to ground contact. This was strategic bombing, planned in advance, executed from so high that the aircraft were invisible and inaudible. "They can strike us from above the clouds," Tin says quietly. "We cannot hear them, we cannot see them, and we cannot stop them." The officers exchange glances. No one speaks, because they all understand what this means. The jungle, which has been their shield and sanctuary, is no longer safe. Nowhere is safe. 300 miles northeast at Tan Son Nhut Air Base outside Saigon, Major General William Momyer stands in the Tactical Air Control Center, studying reconnaissance photographs still wet from processing. The images show target box Alpha 79er from multiple angles, black and white aerial shots taken by RF-101 Voodoo aircraft 2 hours after the strike. Momyer, commander of the 7th Air Force, traces his finger across the cratered landscape. "Count the secondaries," he says to the intelligence officer beside him. Captain Richard Webb points to dark smudges in the photos. "At least 15 confirmed, sir, probably supply caches or fuel stores. The thermal signatures suggest sustained fires for over an hour after impact." Momyer nods. Operation Arc Light, the B-52 strategic bombing campaign adapted for tactical targets in Vietnam, has been running for 13 months. Each mission generates data. Tonnage dropped, area covered, estimated casualties, but the photographs are what matter. They show effectiveness in a way that numbers cannot. "What about troop concentrations?" Momyer asks. "SIGINT intercepted NVA radio traffic reporting heavy casualties. Multiple battalion-level units. One transmission mentioned a division headquarters." Webb pauses. "They didn't know what hit them, sir. The intercepts show confusion, requests for casualty evacuation, and..." He hesitates. "And what, Captain?" "References to silent death and sky demons. The NVA are rattled." In the jungle, Colonel Tin's division completes its nighttime withdrawal. The movement is chaotic. Units are intermixed, command structures disrupted, the wounded slowing the pace to a crawl. Tin walks with 3rd Battalion, his body aching from bruised ribs and a dozen minor injuries he hasn't had time to acknowledge. Around him, men move in silence, broken only by the sounds of stumbling and the occasional suppressed moan from someone whose pain medication has worn off. They reach the secondary assembly area, a valley 3 kilometers west, just before dawn. The location was chosen weeks ago as a fallback position, far enough from the original encampment to provide security, but close enough to maintain operational coherence. Now it serves as a sanctuary for the survivors of something none of them fully comprehend. Lieutenant Thang approaches as Tin settles against a tree trunk. The young officer carries a notebook, its pages damp with humidity and spotted with dirt. "Final casualty count, Comrade Colonel," Thang says quietly. Tin takes the notebook. The numbers are written in careful script. 1,247 confirmed dead, 892 wounded, 416 missing. He does the mathematics automatically, nearly 40% of the division's effective strength, gone in less than 2 minutes. "And the missing?" Tin asks, though he knows the answer. "Most are presumed dead, buried in collapsed bunkers, or..." Thang gestures vaguely, or vaporized, or blown into pieces too small to identify. "The jungle will reclaim them eventually, bones and flesh becoming part of the soil." Tin closes the notebook and hands it back. "How many desertions?" "Officially, none. But 14 men failed to report to the assembly area, and we know they weren't in the strike zone. 14 men who decided that continuing this war meant accepting death from an enemy they couldn't fight back against. Tin cannot blame them. He considers desertion himself sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep. But he's 52 years old and has spent 30 years in various armies. The Viet Minh against the French, now the NVA against the Americans. War is the only profession he knows. At Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, Captain Halloran descends from Iron Hand 2-3 after a flight lasting 7 hours and 42 minutes. His legs are stiff from sitting. His back aches. Marsh follows him down the ladder, both men moving with the careful deliberation of men who've been in a vibrating metal tube for most of a day. "Beer?" Marsh asks. "Shower first," Halloran replies, "then beer." They don't discuss the mission. There's nothing to discuss. They dropped bombs on coordinates provided by intelligence. Whether those coordinates corresponded to enemy troops or empty jungle, they'll never know for certain. The mission will be logged, the after-action report filed, and tomorrow or the next day they'll do it again. In the officers' club that evening, Halloran sits with Morrison and Chen, drinking Budweiser from cans, sweating condensation in the tropical heat. A television in the corner plays a baseball game, Cardinals versus Pirates, the footage weeks old, transmitted via military satellite. It's a glimpse of the world they left behind, the America that seems increasingly abstract the longer they serve in this theater. 74, Morrison says, breaking the silence. "What?" Halloran looks at him. 74 missions. That's how many arc lights I've flown. Morrison stares at his beer. "You ever wonder what we're actually hitting down there?" Halloran knows this mood. It comes to all of them eventually, the moment when the abstraction cracks and you start thinking about what 108,000 pounds of high explosives does to human beings. The Air Force has psychologists to handle this, but most crews don't report it. You just ride it out. "We hit what intelligence tells us to hit," Halloran says carefully. "NVA concentration, supply routes, base camps. But we never see them. We drop from 30,000 feet and fly away. We could be bombing empty jungle for all we know." Chen leans forward. "You saw the BDA photos from last week's strike. Those were secondary explosions, real targets." "I know," Morrison drinks. "I know." Back in the valley, as dawn breaks over Vietnam, Colonel Tin assembles his remaining officers. They sit in a rough circle, 21 men representing a division that's been gutted. Tin has spent the night formulating a response to what happened. Not a tactical response, because there is no defense against an enemy that strikes from beyond sight and sound, but a doctrinal one. "The Americans have introduced a new weapon," he begins. "High-altitude bombers that attack without warning. We must assume they will use this weapon again, perhaps against every concentration of our forces they can locate." A major from 2nd Battalion speaks up. "Then how do we operate? If gathering in strength makes us targets..." "We adapt," Tin interrupts. "We disperse further. We move constantly. We camouflage, not just from ground observation, but from aerial reconnaissance. We dig deeper, spread wider, and we accept that concentration of force now carries an existential risk." He sees the looks on their faces, exhaustion, fear, but also something else. Determination. These men are professionals. They've survived the bombing, and survival creates its own kind of resolve. The Americans believe this weapon will break our will, Tin continues. They are wrong. It will force us to change, but we have changed before. We changed for the French. We changed for the Americans when they arrived with helicopters and artillery. We will change again. But privately, as the officers disperse to their units, Tin acknowledges a darker truth. The war has entered a new phase. The jungle is no longer sanctuary. The earth itself can betray them. And the sky, which should be empty and neutral, now conceals an enemy that kills with impunity. He looks up through the canopy at patches of blue visible between the leaves. Somewhere up there, too high to see or hear, aircraft might be circling at this very moment, bomb bays loaded, waiting for coordinates that would erase this valley just as thoroughly as they erased the previous position. The thought should terrify him. Instead, he feels only a profound weariness. This is the war now. This is what they must endure. The war continues, but it is not the same war. In the weeks following June 18, 1966, ARC light missions multiply across South Vietnam and the border regions. The B-52s fly from Guam and later from Utapao in Thailand. Their missions designated by impersonal alphanumeric codes that betray nothing of what happens when their payloads arrive. Target Box Bravo 32, Target Box Delta 97. Each box a rectangle of Earth, each mission a calculation of tonnage and blast radius. Colonel Tin's 9th Division, or what remains of it, spreads across the Central Highlands like water dispersing across stone. Units operate in company strength at most, never concentrating, always moving. They dig their bunkers deeper now, reinforce them with logs and earth 6 feet thick. They sleep light, always listening for what cannot be heard, always watching skies that reveal nothing until it's too late. 3 months after the strike, Sergeant Min leads his reduced squad along a trail near the Cambodian border. There are only 8 of them now, 5 survivors from the June bombing and 3 replacements who arrived last month, young men who hadn't yet learned to read the jungle. Min has changed since that day. He startles at sudden sounds. He insists on spreading his men 50 meters apart, even during movement, refusing to let them cluster. The other sergeants think he's paranoid. He doesn't care. They're moving through triple canopy jungle when one of the new men, Private Keen, barely 18, points at the sky and asks the question that reveals his inexperience. "Sergeant, if the American bombers fly so high we can't hear them, how do we know when to take cover?" Min stops walking. The other men gather around, waiting for his answer. He looks up at the canopy, at the fragmentary sky visible through the leaves, and realizes he has no answer that will comfort them. "You don't know," he says finally. "You dig in deep. You spread out. And you hope they're bombing somewhere else." Keen's face falls. He's looking for doctrine, for procedure, for something that creates the illusion of control. But Min learned on June 18th that such illusions are lies. The bombing taught him that death in this war comes in forms that mock human agency, invisible, inaudible, unsurvivable. You either accept that and continue fighting, or you break. At Tan Son Nhut, Major General Momyer reviews the quarterly assessment of ARC light effectiveness. The statistics are impressive. 1,200 missions flown, 120,000 tons of ordnance delivered, estimated 18,000 enemy casualties. The numbers please his superiors in Honolulu and Washington. They suggest progress, attrition, the slow grinding down of an enemy who cannot be brought to conventional battle. But Momyer has read the intelligence reports too. The NVA haven't collapsed. They've adapted. They move in smaller units now, spread their logistics, accept casualties as inevitable cost. The bombing forces them to change tactics but not strategy. They're still infiltrating south. They're still attacking outposts and ambushing patrols. The war continues. He signs the report and passes it to his aide. Somewhere over Laos at this moment, another cell of B-52s is en route to another target box. Tomorrow there will be more, and the day after. The strategic bombing campaign has become perpetual, a background condition of the war, as routine as artillery fire and as impersonal as weather. In Guam, Captain Halloran completes his 100th ARC light mission on a humid afternoon in September. Iron Hand 2-3 touches down at Anderson, and as he climbs out of the cockpit, ground crew members spray him with champagne in an impromptu celebration. 100 missions. He's a veteran now by any measure, experienced enough to train new pilots, senior enough to have his own crew. That night in the officers' club, someone asks him what it's like, flying all those missions, dropping all those bombs. Halloran considers the question carefully. He thinks about the instrument panels and the radar scopes, the endless hours at altitude, the return flights where his mind would drift to baseball scores and letters from home and whether the club would have steak or fish for dinner. He thinks about how the actual bombing, the moment when tons of explosives fall away into empty air, has become routine, no more remarkable than flipping any other switch. "It's a job," he says finally. "We go where they tell us. We hit what they tell us to hit. Then we come home." It's not quite a lie, but it's not quite the truth either, because sometimes, late at night, when sleep won't come, he does think about the target boxes. He wonders if there were people in those coordinates, and if those people heard anything before the world ended, and whether what he's doing in this war will ever be understood as necessary or just, or worth the cost. But those thoughts are unprofessional, and so he keeps them private, filed away in the same mental space where he stores other uncomfortable truths. This is the compact he's made. Perform the mission, trust the intelligence, believe that the men giving orders know what they're doing. The alternative is to question everything, and questioning everything is paralysis. Colonel Tin survives the war. He survives arc light strikes on 4 more occasions, each time by fortune or fate or the simple arithmetic of spreading his forces thin enough that no single mission can destroy them all. He survives the Tet Offensive and the withdrawal of American forces and the final push to Saigon in 1975. When it's over, when the tanks roll through the presidential palace gates and the war ends, he's 59 years old and so exhausted that victory feels like permission to finally stop moving. In the years after, he will be asked to write his memoirs, to contribute to the official histories being compiled by the Ministry of Defense. He will describe battles and strategies, the long march down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the camaraderie of soldiers, and the satisfaction of eventual triumph. But he will find himself unable to adequately describe June 18th, 1966. How do you explain to someone who wasn't there what it means to be bombed by an enemy you cannot perceive? How do you convey the psychological weight of knowing that at any moment, without warning, the sky might open and erase you? The words he writes seem inadequate, abstractions that fail to capture the visceral terror of that day. In the end, he settles for simple facts: the date, the location, the casualties. He notes that the division reformed and continued fighting. He describes it as a difficult period that required tactical adjustments. The official history will record it as one engagement among thousands, notable only for its casualty count. But Sergeant Min, who becomes Lieutenant Min and then Captain Min and retires in 1982, will tell a different story to his children. He'll describe the silence before the bombs, the way the earth split open, the faces of men who died not from bullets or shrapnel, but from simple overpressure, their bodies intact but their organs pulped. He'll tell them about Private Cow with his open eyes, about the man with crushed legs begging for help, about the 14 soldiers who vanished rather than accept the possibility of more silent death. "The Americans called it arc light," Min will say. "We called it other things, sky demons, silent thunder, the death you cannot fight." He'll pause, choosing his words carefully. "It was meant to break us, and it broke some. But most of us learned to live with it, the way you learn to live with malaria or monsoon rains. You accept it as part of the war. You keep fighting." His children will nod, but they won't fully understand. How could they? They grew up in peacetime, in a Vietnam where the skies contain only commercial jets and passenger planes, where bombing is ancient history, where war is something their parents and grandparents endured, but they will never experience. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the purpose of enduring was always to create a future where such endurance would not be necessary. The B-52 Stratofortress continues flying long after the Vietnam War ends. Some of the same aircraft that flew Arc Light missions in the 1960s remain in service into the 21st century, their airframes old enough to have been flown by 3 generations of crew members. They fly over Iraq and Afghanistan, dropping precision-guided munitions instead of iron bombs, their missions now surgical rather than strategic. But the principle remains unchanged. Overwhelming force delivered from an altitude where the bomber remains invulnerable, where the enemy below cannot respond, cannot even perceive the threat until the weapons arrive. It's a form of warfare that's fundamentally asymmetric, and asymmetry creates its own moral complications. Was it effective? The statistics suggest yes. Did it win the war? The answer is more complicated. The B-52 strikes inflicted enormous casualties and forced the NVA to adapt their entire operational doctrine. But they didn't break the enemy's will. They didn't prevent infiltration or stop attacks or achieve decisive strategic victory. What they did was create a new reality, one where the jungle offered no sanctuary, where concentration meant annihilation, where soldiers on both sides had to accept that modern war had evolved beyond anything human instincts had prepared them for. The bomber crews flew their missions in climate-controlled cockpits and slept in air-conditioned barracks. The soldiers below lived in mud and heat and constant fear, knowing that death might fall from a clear sky without warning. This was the war. This is what it demanded of all who fought it. And in the end, when historians compile their accounts and veterans share their stories and children learn about Vietnam in classrooms, the Arc Light missions will be footnotes. Statistics about tonnage and casualties, technical details about altitude and payload capacity. The human experience beneath those statistics, the terror and adaptation, the survival and trauma, will fade into the background, as such experiences always do. But Colonel Tin knew. Sergeant Min knew. Private Duke, who survived and returned home and spent the rest of his life unable to sleep when aircraft flew overhead, knew. They knew what it meant to look up at an empty sky and understand that it might be full of death you couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't stop. They knew what it meant to continue fighting anyway, day after day, mission after mission, because the alternative was surrender. That knowledge, more than any statistic or strategy, is the true legacy of Arc Light. It's the memory of men who learned to live under the weight of silent skies and somehow found the strength to keep fighting.